Hello, I'm going to talk to you about Chapter 21 now. Chapter 21 is about the lymphatic system. Now, when it comes to the lymphatic system, remember we talked about where this came from. And from the capillary beds, you can see here in red, purple, and blue, the capillary beds. Right there, remember some of the fluid was left behind, about 15% of the fluid that came out of the capillaries. And then went back in at the venule end of the capillaries from the arterial end to the venule end. About 15% or so was left behind. And this is what goes into the lymphatic system. There are two parts to the lymphatic system. Today in Chapter 21, we look at just the structures of the system. All right, we kind of look just at the structures, where lymph flows and things like that. It's in Chapter 22 that we get down to the cells and how it works to give us immunity. But let's start here. There are two kinds of organs or tissues in the lymphatic system, primary and secondary. Primary are where the cells form, where the cells come from, where they form. Most of them form in the bone marrow. Pretty much all of them do, except T cells. T cells leave the bone marrow as pre-T cells. They flow through the blood and then they go to the thymus where their maturity begins or continues on into mature T cells. All right. So because the formation of cells occurs in both the bone marrow and the thymus, they're considered primary organs or tissues. Secondary are where the immune cells wait, respond, and proliferate, where they're kept when they're not being activated. These are the spleen, tonsils, lymph nodes, and other lymphoid tissue. So the lymphatic capillaries carry lymph away from the circulatory beds, capillary circulatory beds. So just as we discussed in the circulatory system, the blood flows in to the capillary from the arteriole, loses its fluid, drops off its oxygen, picks up carbon dioxide, picks up waste, drops off nutrients, hormones, whatnot along the way, and then it gets to the venule, the other end of the capillary, and now it's deoxygenated and continues back to the heart. But remember, only 85% of what came out at one end here went back in at the other. And so that 15% ends up going into what we see in green here, the lymphatic capillaries. Now, they are even more permeable than the capillary beds, which are very permeable anyway. Here, there's like an overlap or a flap here between the cells, okay? So there really isn't much of a basement membrane either. Here, the basement membrane is even weaker here. So these cells overlap and the fluid would build up in here and then cause just a hydrostatic pressure as it builds up to push fluid into the lymphatic capillaries. All right. You can see that they end. They are not continuous round and round and round. They end. They stop here, or they rather start. This really isn't an end, it's a start. And then they end in the thoracic duct. So we'll talk about those lymphatic ducts. So the blood loses its fluid. The fluid that's left flows into the lymphatic capillaries. Now it is called lymph. The fluid is called lymph once it gets in there. Okay. So organs here, we're talking about the thymus. Already mentioned that one. The spleen, something called MALT. Mucosal associated lymphatic tissues in the small intestines, and there are other places too. Lymph nodes, the tonsils, all right, the red bone marrow. These are all structures or organs of the lymphatic system. So the lymphatic system goes from the capillaries, which we just saw, to vessels, to trunks, to ducts. All right. This green here is that flow. So it gets picked up in various parts of the body, wherever the capillary beds are, and then it flows through this system, the lymphatic system, these vessels, ducts and trunks. So the lymphatic vessels fed by capillaries, lymphatic trunks fed by lymphatic vessels. Know what the trunks names are. We did some of this here, lymphatic trunks. So know what the trunks names are and know the ducts names. Ducts are fed by lymphatic trunks. On the park bench, throws it to them, sorry. Lymphatic ducts drain lymph back into the blood circulation. So they're the last stop, they're the last vessel of the lymphatic system. And, well, we're using vessels here, vasculature or drain. And drain is a proper term we're talking about here because this fluid is just finding its way back basically by draining back into the blood circulation. So what we got here is the right lymphatic duct and the thoracic duct. You can see them here, the right lymphatic duct, thoracic duct right here, right lymphatic duct. So the area drained by the right lymphatic duct is the right, just this part of the body, okay? The right upper torso, the right half of the head, and the right arm. The whole rest of the body, okay, is drained by the thoracic duct. So that, of course, would make it the largest lymphatic vessel, as you can probably imagine. So looking at the primary lymphatic organs, bone marrow, hematopoiesis occurs here, so formation of blood cells. You can see here the bone marrow has the blood cells forming, okay, puts them into circulation here, okay, all of them except for the pre-T lymphocyte cells. Those get put into circulation, then they go into the thymus where they mature, and then they go into the blood, okay, well, they come from the blood too, but anyway. So we talked about those. Here's where you find them. This is the thyroid. Do not mistake it for the thymus. This is in a child. The thymus is much larger. Thymus kind of wraps around the heart, the top of the heart. The thyroid is around the larynx, a little further up, a little further superior. Okay, so looking at the secondary lymphatic organs and tissues, the lymphatic nodules. This is kind of the basic structure of the lymphatic system, and this is where the immune cells kind of hang out. We said that before here. The secondary, right? When we define secondary, where immune cells wait, respond, proliferate. This is kind of basically where they do that, where they hang out. They're like in little centers like this that have a coating around them, okay? So this is called the lymphatic nodule. Particular fibers support a germinal center. So in the center here is where the cells that proliferate, those white blood cells, those leukocytes we were just mentioning, that's where they are, and that's where they proliferate. Germination is when cells grow, okay? If an infection occurs, or if the body thinks an infection is occurring. Houses proliferating B lymphocytes, macrophages, surrounding mantle zone is T lymphocytes, okay, and dendritic cells. Something called MALT, mucosal associated lymphatic tissue, located in intestinal, respiratory, genital, urinary tracts, associated with many organs and tissues throughout the body. I think the book even says all organs. It's like, I don't think all, some nervous system organs and parts don't necessarily have these, but there's a lot of them. They're all throughout the body, and these little nodules like this are just kind of hanging out in amongst the epithelium or below the epithelium, in the lamina propria, and they're there to elicit or respond immunologically if something occurs in that area of the body. They're ready to go at it. Okay, so these are lymphatic tissues, or lymphoid tissues, and they're just nodules that are kind of placed throughout the body. And there's certain spaces where you always find them, especially in the gastrointestinal, respiratory, genital, urinary tracts. I call them rogue lymphatic nodules, sort of free form, okay? So these little balls of cells of B cells and T cells, they get to just kind of hang out in all different parts of the body. Tonsils have a bunch of them. So the tonsils, pharyngeal tonsil, in the nasopharynx. So here you can see where the pharyngeal tonsil is, nasopharynx. Enlarged adenoids, it kind of cuts off the air through there. Palatine tonsils, you can see it from the palate. Linguinal tonsils at the back of the tongue, okay? And then mucosal-associated lymphatic tissues, okay? Just mentioned those. Look at a little bit of tonsil histology here. Take a look at this. It's kind of neat. We've got germinal centers, as you can see here, where the lymph nodules are, right? And then tonsillar crypts. So there's like these openings or cracks, if you will. You kind of think of them as cracks, because what happens is the tonsils, as things move past food, air moves past the tonsils, over the tonsils, and they move around. They take into these spaces some of the food. They take into these spaces maybe some of the air or water, whatever's going through, and they can process that for foreign invaders right there in the tonsils. It's also how tonsils some people's tonsils can tend to get infected a little more often than others. So lymph nodes, you find the nodules inside nodes. Okay, so here you see the nodules again, right? The germinal centers. And this whole green thing out here is a node. So it's encapsulated and it contains the nodules like this. So this is what we were looking at. Remember, the lymph leaves those capillary beds and flows here through these lymphatic vessels, okay? Trunks, vessels to trunks to ducts. And these feed into, you can see the flow of the fluid goes through here. It kind of flows through and washes around in between and over these centers right here, these nodules. And as it does so, it's being processed. The lymph is being processed for foreign invaders, for foreign substances, foreign invaders, so that these cells, the T and B cells, can respond to them by proliferating. This is why if you go to the doctor sometimes, this is kind of an old method, but the doctors probably still use it. If they're trying to determine if you have an infection, like an active infection, they'll sit there and they'll feel right around your neck. There's a few spots where you have like a concentration of these nodes, your neck, your groin, and your axillary area, so in your armpit. They might even feel there. They usually don't, I guess they don't feel the groin too much. But yeah, they'll feel and see if there's a swelling. It's a little swelling. And that swelling will tell them that these have grown because they're proliferating. The cells inside, the T and B cells, are proliferating. They're growing. They're undergoing mitosis. They're making copies of themselves because they responded to something. Tells the doctor that you're likely fighting an infection. Okay? So it washes over them kind of and then gets all collected down into an efferent lymphatic vessel. So afferent in, efferent out. The way I always remember it, there's afferent. A for afferent. A in the alphabet comes before E. So fluid has to go in before it can come out. First it goes in, then it comes out. First it's an afferent, letter A, then it's an efferent, letter E. Because that's the only thing that's different between those two words is the first letter. Anyway, that's how I always remember those words. So let's look at the spleen for a minute. Now we just defined what a lymph nodule is, where you find them, how they work. Here they're collected together in a lymph node, right? Here they kind of collect together in the spleen. And what the lymph node is doing for the lymph, the spleen does for the blood. Cleans up the blood, okay? And part of its job of cleaning up the blood is to break down the old erythrocytes, the old red blood cells. It takes them out. Works with the liver in that. It starts the process, the liver finishes it. So we've got two different types of tissues in the spleen. Okay, the white pulp, right here, and the red pulp. Okay, in the white pulp you find the T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes. Red pulp has the erythrocytes, platelets, macrophages. So in other words, it's kind of like it's checking out for foreign substances in the white pulp, and the red pulp is where the erythrocytes are being broken down. So the erythrocytes are being broken down. The red makes sense, right? Erythrocytes are red blood cells, so the red pulp would have that going on in it, and the white pulp would have the other immunological activities going on. Okay, so that puts us through chapter 21. It's kind of a short chapter. And so we'll end it there, and we'll get into chapter 22 after this next week. 22 is kind of long, but anyway, we look at some of the, we look at how the immune system works.